Hey everybody, this is Matt from Crooked Pigs. Thanks for tuning into our YouTube channel. We're here at the Jack 2022. I'm getting ready to trim some briskets, but I wanted to show y'all what I'm looking for when I select a brisket. So I'm gonna have the camera zoom in here. We've got two Snake River briskets here. One is a Snake River Farms black that we hand selected from a grocery store. The other is a gold we ordered. We're gonna have to take a look at these. You can get in here close. First one I've got here is the black we selected. So what I'm looking for, first of all, I want a good thick flat, but most importantly, I'm looking for that marbling right here. You can see the striations of fat, that intramuscular fat marbling in there. That's what I'm really looking for, and you can see it here in the side of the flat. If you can see in close there, you can see all that going through there. That's a real good brisket that we hand selected. Again, this was a black from a grocery store. What is it? 19.09 pounds. 150 to 225 is the price on that. The other brisket that we're going to cook is a gold we ordered. Very similar. You know, if you're going to roll bit ice and order brisket, I'd suggest ordering that gold because you know you're going to get a pretty good marbled one. If you have the option to hand select out of the grocery store, that's a good option too, because you know you're going through more, but you can pick a nice one. But here you again see the striations of fat. I'm going to turn it again. You can see that right there. Now another thing that I like to find in these, here's the side of the flat. Let's see that. See the striations in there. This is a good one. What I don't like in a brisket flat is this seam of fat you can see kind of running on top of that one, because I'm going to want to cut that out, and I'll show you later as we trim this, but I'm going to want to cut that out, and it kind of leaves a little dip in it, and so my slice in the box will show just a little dip. It won't be perfectly round across the top, but I'll try to feather the meat around that. You'll see as we start to trim. But I don't see that one here in this black one. It doesn't have that middle piece of that. You see some fat over here and some fat over here, but not right down the middle. So it's nice to have that. I don't have to feather that out, and I'm gonna get a nice big round slice out of that. I will out of this other one too, but it's just going to be a little more work to get it there. So anyway, I'm going to cut into these and we'll look at them a little bit better, but I just wanted to show you what they look like in the cryo. Okay, we're back here with the black hand selected out of the cryo vac. The first thing I'm going to do is put a piece of paper towel underneath that brisket so it kind of holds it and keeps it stuck on the cutting board so it doesn't slide around. These are disposable cutting boards that we use. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to take a little bit of this fat off the top, because I want my rub to adhere. It's not going to adhere to that fat. It's going to kind of wash off through the cook. So I'm going to take some of that top fat off. Now I'm going to trim that a little bit better once I get the point separated from the flat. Just try to use a real sharp knife and just carefully. There's going to be a little silver skin here too. You're going to try to take that off a little bit, and I'll clean that up a lot more than this once I get them separated, but I try to get a little bit of it off just initially so I can kind of see what I'm working with. A lot of this down here at the toe end I'm not going to leave on the brisket anyway. I'm not going to leave that part of the meat on. I'm going to trim it down pretty small here because we're cooking hot and fast on the gateway drums. So I really don't need to work too much on the edges, but I'm going to focus in up here. So now you can see the brisket certainly has more marbling up here towards the point than it does down here on the toe. So I'm going to really try to focus on getting my slices out up in here. So this is all the part that really matters right in here. And I'm just going to work this out of here as best we can. There is a little bit of fat in this top of this flat here, in that valley there. All right, that's about where I'm going to leave it until I get the pieces separated. So in order to separate these, I'm going to come right here to this big chunk of fat. We're just going to start going through it, okay? Kind of allow me to see better what I'm working with. I'll turn it a little so you can see. I want to get that chunk out. Okay, now what you can see now, once I've taken that off, as you can see, where that seam of fat is between the point and the flat. I'll cut a little more off there. We'll keep cutting into that fat just so I can see where that seam goes. Alright, now the reason I'm doing this is because I want to leave as much of that fat on the bottom of the flat as I can so that I can use it to insulate my brisket from direct heat, because I'm going to cook that on a gateway on direct heat. So I'm going to cut right here. Alright, I'm going to start separating here, if you can see. Turn it a little bit so we can see a little bit better here. Alright, you can see that there. Here's that seam between the flat and the point. I'm going to try to follow that, and I want to err on the side of the point meat so I don't cut into that flat, that lean flat meat, because I want to leave all that on to insulate. So I'm just going to work it around here until I get that started. And you can see it there. This is the point. Flat's up here with that fat seam all left on. I'm just going to work it right in here. Real sharp knife. I'm just going to pull gently. Run that knife through. And I'd rather leave a little bit of that point meat on the fat than gouge into that flat. So I'm just going to keep running it like that, and you can see it's coming apart nicely. Okay. Now I'm through the point. There's a little point meat left on there, but we're real close to through. It's almost too thin to even cook that point at that point. So we're cutting that off. And we're done with that point. So I'm going to set that aside. Now I have a flat separated, whole flat. The first thing I'm going to do, try to clean up my board a little here, is I'm going to flip it over, meat side down. Take my paper towel off, chuck that. Now I want to level this out some, because I want this thing to sit nice and flat. However, I want it to be a little bit higher in the middle than on the edges, so that when it sits on my grate, any moisture that's released as it cooks rolls off the sides rather than puddles in the middle. So we're going to take and start trimming the edges a little bit here first. Try to get a nice flat working surface with a little raise in the middle. And I'm going to try to take some of that kind of gray oxidized fat off. Just a little though, I don't want to gouge into that meat. I'm not really too particular about taking all of it off because I'm cooking it hot and fast. And we're not eating it anyway, so alright. It's getting flat. Take a little more off over here. Just keep working at it real slow. If you're not confident where you're going to cut, just take a little bit off. You can always come back and take more off. It's just hard to put that fat back on. Alright. Alright, that's looking fairly flat. We'll come back and do some touch-ups after I start shaping this flat down. Alright, so here we go. Here's our flat. I'm going to take some of this fat off here. I'm going to just clean up all the edges real good. Alright, so if I'm at home, I'm going to cook this piece of flat. I'm going to try to keep as much of this brisket as I can. So what I would do at home is I would start cleaning up these corners a little. Take that edge off. Any real pointy, thin piece is going to overcook. It's going to burn, over caramelize. It's going to start to give an acrid or bitter taste, especially once it's put in the wrap. So I would try to take off any sharp edges, any big corners. so that it's a nice round, smooth looking flat. So if I were cooking it at home, that's about where I'd leave it, right there. But for competition, I'm going to cut that down so it fits the box a little better. So here's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to look at my marbling and the thickness of the flat. I'm going to try to gauge where I've got a pretty even thickness throughout. This is nice and thick here over on this point side, and it starts to taper, as you can see over here. So I'm going to try to take some of this off over here so I keep a nice thick flat slice in through here. It's going to fit my box. Now I'm going to try to shape this to fit the turning box. So I'm going to go ahead and start by cutting that chunk off. Now I'm going to try to cut parallel with the grain so that when you slice perpendicular to that oval brisket, it's right against the grain. And see how narrow that is now? I've taken that. That's pretty thin stuff there. You're not going to really get a slice out of that for a turn-in box. You're going to have to cut it down eventually anyhow. All right. So this knife is a pretty good gauge of about how wide I want it. I think this is a 6-inch boning knife, so I try to go about an inch past it and do 7-inch slices. So we're getting pretty close. And I'll just kind of whittle this thing down a little on each side, keeping an eye on how thick it is on each side. I'll give you a side shot of that here. Okay, you can see that fat seam. Here's a little point meat left, but I'm going to use that to insulate. So that's about how thick that brisket flat is on the very edge over here. And if you look over here, really pretty close to the same thickness. So I can just inch each side down until I'm comfortable with how thick it is, or how wide it is. Take a little more off over here. Now, the meat on this side is slightly better, I think, than the meat over here. It's usually more marble over here on this point end than over here on the toe end. But the disadvantage is you can see the grain's a little looser, and so that tends to crumble sometimes during the cook. So it's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here. You prefer the meat over here, yet the meat over here stays together a little better when you slice it. So I kind of just try to compromise and make the best compromise I can as I trim that. Here I'm taking a little more off. Just a little more still. Now, at comp, this toe, you can see how much more marbled this is up here than down at the toe. I don't even want this down here. There's enough up here for me to get some slices out of, so I'm going to go ahead and hack that off. I don't need that one bit. Not even that marbled down at the toe versus up here by the point. So I just cut that off, leave enough that we have some to taste and whatnot. I'll just set all this to the side. All right, now we're getting closer. All right, I'm going to continue to take a little off each side until I get about where I want. Again, just like that fat cap, it's easier to take more off than to put more on. So that is about where I want that thick width-wise. Okay, so now I'm going to come back and trim up some of these edges a little bit so we don't have anything that burns. Get it kind of rounded. I'm going to flip this over and start taking a little more of this fat cap off around the edges so it'll not puddle that liquid and wash my rub off. I want that bark to set real nice. And if you have any low spots, that bark just won't set. It's a little bit raised there in the middle. This side could come down a little some. I'll just again keep chipping away at it until I'm comfortable with it. Still have a little of that point meat on there. It's fine. The fat cap's kind of thin in there, so I'd like to just leave a little of that on to insulate and to keep a nice even top. So I've taken a little off here. We'll flip that over and see where we're at. seemed a little high there at the toe, so I'm just going to taper that down a little so all that liquid can run off. All right, now what I'm going to do, grab a pair of scissors. These are scissors I like, they're Schuns. I'm going to use these to trim the edges just a little bit. We're going to come in here. I'm going to take that corner off right there. Now, would I ever do this at home? No, but on a comp brisket, I want a nice oval shaped slice. Not too much. You don't want it to look like a meatloaf, but you want it to look like it just was made that way. And so you just take a little of that edge off. I'll come back and I'll do it again here. All right, now you can see how that looks. Nice even edge. So I'll, again, hit some other corners here. I don't want any corners. I want it to be a nice round piece of meat. So I don't have any burning edges that are thin or pointy. All right, you can see how I'm taking all those corners off there. All right, now that's shaped about how I want it. Quite frankly, you could take another 3 or 4 inches off there and still have enough to turn in, but I'd like to be safe and have a few extra slices to taste. And you know, if you get too small, you start running out of space. We need 7 slices here at the Jack, so I'm going to leave a little more on there just to be on the safe side. One other thing I'm going to do though before I'm finished with this. First of all, again, I've got a little bit of a valley right there, so I'm going to flip it over and take a little more meat off in here, if I can. See if I can't even that out some. Might have gone a little too far there. That's okay, we can just work with it. I think we need to take a little off right here. Now, if you don't get it perfectly flat, or you put it on your grill in the morning and you feel like there's a bit of a valley, a bit of a low spot that you don't feel like is going to set good bark, that's okay. I'm still in point meat here, so we're good. You can always prop something underneath that, so you got a couple of options. Some folks use a piece of wood, some folks use a piece of fat, but you can do whatever you need to prop that up. Now I think that's pretty good. I don't see a real low spot there. That's going to sit real nice on the grill. Everything's going to kind of run off. But if you need to, you can take a piece of knuckle fat or whatever in here, a piece of meat, cut that down, and prop that right under the middle of your brisket while you're cooking it, and that raises the middle so that everything kind of rolls off. Maybe need 2 pieces if your flat's fairly long. And you can see how that raises that middle just ever so slightly if you feel like you got a low spot. But I feel like this one's pretty good, so I'm going to set that right on the grate in the morning. Now I'm going to come back and just see if I can clean up any little pieces here of silver skin or fat, just to make sure my rub sticks. There's a pretty good section right there I'm going to take out. Alright. Again, I don't want that rub washing off when that fat starts to render, and that's what will happen if you don't take some of this out. And there's a little piece right here. I want to edge that out just a little bit. So with my knife, I kind of go in at an angle and come back out, and I've pulled that out. See how that goes? The problem now is I've got just a little dip in the top of that flat, so I'm going to try to feather that. So I'm just going to put the knife across that little dip and try to even out the surface of that, and I think we got it there. One more little piece there. Sometimes there's some parts that stick up. I might even take my knife and just kind of scrape it with the sharp edge with the grain. Just try to clean that top up ever so slightly. Maybe a little too much fat right in here. Try to feather that out as well. One little spot there. All right. That I feel like is ready to cook. Now, again, I could take off some here and make it totally square. I could take off more down here where it's not so marbled, but I think that's fine for comp. It's shaped appropriately for the box. So when that comes off the grill, I'm just gonna slice that thing and lay them in the box. They're gonna look perfect. Now, I don't cook the point, but if you were going to cook the point, now's the time to trim that, and I can show you how I would trim it if I were going to. So I'm gonna grab that point and do that now. Clear the board here a little bit. Now, if I were going to cook burn ends, I don't turn the burn ends in right now. I don't think judges can settle on what they think a burn end should be like. Some like them melty, some like them a little more fatty, some like them crunchy or crispy. And I think that you shoot yourself in the foot more often than not. Now, it might help you in best case scenarios. I think that if all the judges happen to agree on what a good burn end is, and you've got that, then I think that it raises the level of difficulty, probably raises the maximum score you could get on that brisket box. But I think more often than not, it harms you. So I'm not turning burn ends in. I haven't turned them in for several years now, though I think maybe they're starting to make a comeback, and we may move that direction as the years go by if our brisket score starts to suffer. All right, so I'm cleaning that up a little bit, as you can see. And again, if I were cooking these for burn ends at a comp, I'm gonna do a very similar thing that I would do with that flat. I'm gonna try to clean it up, and I'm going to try to make it a nice, even piece of meat so it cooks evenly. That means, first of all, evening up the underside so that it lays flat. Okay. Now, this is a whole lot thinner over here than up here. So at a comp, man, I'm tempted to cut a lot of this off. I would probably come in right here, cut all of that off. Now I'll save this, make chili or grind it or whatever, but I don't need that many burn ends at comp. So I'm gonna kind of look at the thickness of my point here versus the fat cap, and I'm gonna try to even it out. As you can see, it's thicker up here than here, so we're gonna try to make a nice, even, flat point here. Now I want to cut about inch by inch burn ends out of this when I'm done in a grid. So it's going to help if I start with a nice square piece of meat. So that's what I'm doing. I'm probably not going to use the end pieces, so I don't mind, again, cutting the corners so that nothing burns. So I'll cut those around again, like so. Now, if I'm eating a burn end, that's the piece I want. I want a 1 inch by 1 inch square, but that's too fatty for a lot of judges. So, you know, we might use some over here where it's a little less so, or up in here where it's more meaty. I just think the judges have a hard time deciding. I think that most barbecue cooks pretty universally would prefer to eat a burn end from there than from there or there. But I don't know that judges can agree on that. So, but I'll just leave it all on there and cook it and decide based on how it turns out. If I think I've rendered enough of that fat, well then I'll maybe try to turn in that fatty end. But if it's not rendered enough, or it's a little chewy or whatever, I might go to the other end. But if I'm cooking burn ends, this is about how my point looks when I do. Now we're going to turn in, what, 6 or 7 burn ends, so there's not really any point in cooking that big old point with edges that you know you're not going to use, you may as well get that down to about what you're going to use. Save on time trimming later by trimming now. And that's what we're doing. Some of you might be upset that I'm trimming off that much of a Wagyu brisket, but it comps. It's all about how much energy you have left at the end. And if I got to spend a lot of time between turn-ins prepping my brisket for turn-in, not a good use of my energy. I might as well do it the night before, 2 days before I leave for the comp, and save my energy for what matters, putting the best meat in the box. I know I'm not going to use any of the rest of that I cut off at comps, so I may as well get rid of it now. Just cleaning up the top of this a little more. That's about where I'm leaving the point. Let me get the flat and the point together side by side and give you a final product here. And those are ready to get injected and go on the drum smoker for morning. Thanks for watching. Okay, so we're back here with the gold brisket. I've cleaned it up some, and it's not perfect quite yet, but I just wanted to finish taking out that bit of fat on the top of the flat and show you how I do that without gouging too deep of a V into my slice. So here it is. I'm going to just take the knife, I'm going to run it perpendicular to the grain. And I'm going to try to take some of that fat out without gouging deep. Okay, now you can see, clean that up some. There's a little bit left in there, so I'm going to stick my hand underneath it and prop it right underneath that fat, and I'm going to kind of come in it like that and get some of that out of there. Alright. Now it's got to come out again because the rub's not going to stick to that. It's going to look lighter than the rest of it. So now you can see I've got a nice deep gouge there. So I'm going to come back, try to feather it out. Cut the lean meat down a little bit on the sides of it. Until it's flush. You don't want to go too far, and you can leave a little bit of that in there. It's not going to be the end of the world if you have a little bit of a dip at the top of your slice. But you just don't want a big old M-shaped slice. You want it to be a nice upside down U or rainbow shaped slice. You don't want it to have a big dip in it. So you can see now I've cut most of that out of there. You can maybe do a little more feathering in here. Just like that. Lift and use your hands on the underside, because that allows you to push that meat up so that your knife doesn't cut the meat around it. As you can see now, I've taken that fat seam out, but it's still a nice, even, round shape. That's how I deal with that. Sometimes these Wagyu briskets have that in the middle. Just the price you got to pay for a nice marbled piece of Wagyu brisket, but it's not a problem. We can take care of it real easy just like that by feathering that fat vein out. So that's how we do it. Okay, we're back here with the finished trimmed cryovac briskets. I'll show them to you here on the counter. Here on my right is the gold brisket. You can see it's well marbled, maybe a little coarser marbling than here over on the black. Black is over here. You can see it's a little finer marbling. Hard to tell which has better marbling, but it's finer here on the black. The gold, however, is a little bit redder piece of meat. So both will turn out well, but we're going to cook them both at the jack, see which one turns out better, which one we nail on doneness. As you can see, I've left them a little longer than some. Sometimes at comp, I used to cut them much smaller. I'd cut them down about that size, because this obviously isn't long enough for a turn-in slice, but I'm spending a lot more time on the board, dialing in the rub and the sauce and just the final flavor, tasting, tuning it up, tasting it again, and making sure that what I turn in the box is exactly what I want the judge to eat. So I'd like to have a little more of this marbled end left that I can taste, because it starts to run out of marbling as you get towards the toe, and I'd like to be able to taste and tune on the ends here towards the point. But this is the finished product. We'll be injecting these tomorrow evening, and Saturday morning we'll be throwing them on the drum smokers. So that's the finished product. Shout out to Snake River Farms for such great briskets. They always have great briskets. That's what we always cook, and we're happy to cook them here at the Jack. Thanks.